Edwin is a country program manager for Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and he'll tell us what this is. We'll talk about elections, democracy in the country. We are preparing for August, elections coming up. Soon, political parties will start holding their party primaries. Soon, the IEBC will have the elections voter register audited, and then they'll open it up for us to check whether we are doing well, and then we shall go and elect new leaders, and then our new leaders shall come and do what we expect them to do, which is deliver services and move the country forward. And if they don't do that, we'll complain. That's part of democracy. Easy. We'll be discussing democracy in this hour. Edwin, thank you very much for joining us.
Sure. Thanks very much. I hope I'm audible enough.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to be here, and it's also, a good day. For the first time, I think, in a couple of weeks, I've woken up purposely, telling my heart that I'm going for an interview, and not just an interview, but also a discussion that is quite, a departure from what I do. In the mornings, I usually take my run, but this time around I had to skip the runs. But all for a good, reason. And so I'm happy to be here.
We are honored to have you.
Sure.
Welcome to the hot seat.
Thanks.
By the time you're done, same number of calories.
You may not need the run.
Same number of calories will be done. So, tell us about this organization that you represent.
Yes, thanks. So, Konrad Adenauer Foundation is at times you get to hear people saying Stiftung. Basically, it's just a German word for foundation. It is a political foundation that is based in Germany, but we've been in Kenya since the 1970s. So we've followed, the process of how Kenya has tremendously grown politically, socially, and also economically. Taking into account the challenges that the country is facing right now. So we've been part and parcel of this. As a foundation, having been established in Germany, very interestingly, because we had started this discussion even prior to the official, this conversation, is that in Germany, every party that gets a certain percentage in what they call the Bundestag, which is more or less like our National Assembly, is obliged by law to form a foundation. And so you realize that there are quite a number of foundations, and I could name 4 of them here. Konrad, of course, being one of them. You have the Hans Heidel Foundation, you have Heinrich Paul Foundation, Friedrich Schubert Foundation. All these foundations are formed from, the initial establishment and the zeal and the outcomes of polls by the various political parties. So for as long as these political parties are in existence and they have numbers, these foundations would always be there because they draw, public resources, what we call BMZ, for people who are in the development world, money from the taxpayers in Germany to come and, of course, promote democracy across globe. So Kenya is one of the countries where we've had very interesting relationship. Konrad was very formidable in 2002, supporting a few of the process and procedures of reforms and politicians who wanted to do things differently, and just providing them with that space, where they would discuss issues and would be able to network and connect with others.
Let's step back.
Yes.
So it's a legal requirement, you say, for every political party that gets a certain number of elected members into the Bundestag to form a foundation.
Yes.
So how many political parties are we talking about? Like on average, how many parties currently are represented in the assembly?
Right now, you realize that in their Bundestag, in their assembly, there would be, I would give a rough estimate of I think 7 to around 10 right now.
Okay.
Why? It's because there've been new developments. If you've watched the German politics, new development in the sense that you understand that there was a point in time where issues to do with climate change, issues to do with immigration, issues to do with nationalism, these issues were quite off center to them, and there are quite a number of parties, not newly formed, but they used to exist, but they were not stable enough, to get to draw money from the taxpayers. But this time you could see that they're becoming more, popular because of the issues that needs to be sorted out. And so they've been seeing quite a number of representatives, getting into
They've been winning
Bundestag.
more seats.
And I think that is, yes, and I think that is also one of the cases as to why CDU, at one point they were in government. And late last year, you remember, SDP came to government and was able to bring a coalition, what they call the post-election coalition. That is a very common phenomenon in Germany, and some of the things that we try to learn, and also we try to kind of share with the rest of the political parties and actors in terms of what happens in Germany and what happens here, and what we could really borrow from each country. So that's basically it. So you tend to see, of course, it's up to the political foundations to decide where they want to work.
Okay.
So
that is not regulated.
It is not regulated.
You form a foundation.
But
you shall
within
get
their country,
some funding
yes.
from the taxpayer.
Yes.
And what's the expectation of what's the foundation's job?
So our main responsibility is to strengthen democracy, or the tenets of democracy, because Germany is one of the best examples of what democracy can do to our society. And so I think they try to extrapolate this. They try to kind of extend this and share the values of democracy, and provide lessons that they've learned with countries that they think are also important to them. And Kenya is one of the countries. So our core responsibility now, coming to the Kenyan program, is of course overarching objective is to promote democracy, but here we work with quite a number of people just to do that. And being a political foundation, political parties are very important to us. We work, of course, with the civil society on the other side, because we believe that if you are to do checks and balances, or if you are to do civilian oversight, then at least you need the civil society to kind of do that. So those two are very important to us, but of course we also work with other think tanks, and by the MIQ also Conduct is a think tank, so we try to support a few of us who we could work together, develop different studies and research alternatives, and just share them out. So that's what we do.
Before we delve into that, Germany also has representative bodies at the federal, or rather at the regional levels. Do they also have foundations?
No. So
it's only at the national level where you have what they call it, is it the Bundestag?
The Bundestag.
And the Bundesrat, which is now the lower, they don't have it.
No, they don't have it because the foundations are pegged on the political parties, the same political parties that would operate at the national level.
Are represented.
So
this isn't one of those countries where you have the regional entities don't have political parties that you only find in certain regions. All political parties in Germany are, in essence, national.
Yes, all of them are national. But one very interesting thing that you've mentioned is, and maybe I would give you this so that we could compare notes, is in the CDU, when you see the CDU logo, you'd see the CDU/CSU. So CSU is more affiliated to the Hans Seidel Foundation, and it is a very strong party, but very strong in one certain region.
Yes.
But then we've been together I think they've been together for quite some time. They vote together. It's more or less like one. Actually, it's hard for you to kind of differentiate these two political parties because they're just one. And I think that compensates to their political reality there, that there are certain things that have to be fixed in a certain way, and it has been their life, their political life to do so.
I like what you said and what you brought in. Now, they are strong in understanding and growing the political understanding of their democracy within Germany. Now, when they leave Germany and come to other countries in the world where they now want to help promote democracy, the fulcrum on which they base this relationship, it has to do with, is it to develop democracy as envisioned by the countries that they're working within and with? Or is it to bring to bear what they've understood to work for them in Germany and try to see how that can blend in with what the countries or the institutions they're working with actually are? What do they do? I mean, what do you do?
Yes. And I think that's why I'm here, and you cannot see a white person here, because it's very important for actually, first and foremost, the perception to be right, because that has always been the biggest nightmare, not only within the foundation, but just largely in the non-state actors, fraternity. The politics of, international the discussions around international politics, and what happens when the big brothers, in quotes, feel that there's a problem and they need to address, or feel that there is something that they could extend to the small brothers and so forth. That has always been a very delicate discussion, and how we approach it is very I would say focused, but sensitive based, in such a way that I understand the context, and that is why I have to kind of marry what works for them and what I think works for us. But the thing is that we consult quite a lot, and the idea that we try to build on is that at no particular point should the Germans come and say, we are bringing you these kinds of solutions. What they come in to say is that we are coming to work with you to identify solutions that work for you. But as we do that, there is something that we can at least tell you, because we've come at least from where you guys are. But at the same time, there is always something that we can learn, because we tend to also go back, and you could see the current development across the globe is that, at no particular point could you think nationalism could be, a very big issue where now countries start to find where and how to close their borders, and identify with their people vis-a-vis others. There was a time where we used to talk about integration, regional integrations and so forth. I would say, without any benefit of doubt, that there is so much also these foundations also learn from our politics, but of course we try to use their experiences, and also looking at Germany and where they are, a country that the budget is almost 2 times the African continent budget, it is looking at how they address corruption, looking, when you go there and you talk about corruption and you look at their ways of life, you tend to see where our problems are.
Let me ask you this simple question, okay? I'm glad you brought in that comparison. Now, Germany wasn't always one united country. There were many states and they were brought together by, Otto von Bismarck is credited with that particular unification. Now, if I look at what the government of Germany offers its citizens, the push that they've had to ensuring that every citizen, irrespective of who they are, enjoys certain benefits, or they can take for granted certain services that are provided for them by their country as a result of the taxes that they pay. Now, if I look at the seriousness with which the German government approaches such matters, would I then be in a good position to say that perhaps it is because of this that trust is then engendered between the citizenry and their government, and so that things like corruption and crime are at a very tolerable level? Meaning, the need for someone to go and steal a metal rod in the middle of a road is a lot less in Germany than it is in Kenya. The need for someone to actually go and remove a barrier on a road which is made out of metal to go and sell it as scrap metal is less in Germany than it is in Kenya.
Sure. You're totally right. I mean, democracy ceases to work when people hope and they suggest and they continue suggesting, but nothing seems to happen. And so if that becomes a trend, people become hopeless. Your politics becomes more expensive because people cannot even understand your agenda anymore. People know that after 4 years they're going to be where they were. And I usually tend to say this. So if your politics become expensive, it's because things are not working out, and so you try to compensate on the other side. For Germany, it has been very progressive. They make suggestions, and one of the things that I want to also be very frank with you is, I've watched their politics. At no point do they discuss about poverty inwardly. They don't discuss poverty within because they've set measures to be able to address that. Germany is a rich country. It's a parliamentary system. Of course, if you go to systems, they're a bit different. But if you look at how they campaign, and I was with one of the former mayors, and he said that he was campaigning in one of the biggest cities in Germany, and spent almost close to 2 million Kenya shillings to run his entire campaign. And when we were trying to suggest how much we use here, they couldn't add the maths because they felt this is just too expensive for politics.
I reckon some folks over here probably will not be able to put the maths together as well. Anyway, so you said that some of the work that is done is specifically with political parties. If we're looking currently at the situation that political parties are facing in Kenya, there are some issues here and there. The registrar is asking certain people to do things in a certain way. Nominations, primaries are an absolute mess. Because then you said we're not going to come and tell you what to do. We may come and say, okay, here's a problem, suggestion of solutions. What kind of work is being done with political parties in Kenya right now to be able to streamline some of these processes?
Yes. Very, very honest question. And the thing is, it gets crazy also for us working with political parties and knowing that political parties are not the best when it comes to discipline and when it comes to, providing certain services, and I think nomination, procedures and them being able to do it right is one of the key, preliminary services that political parties ought to give in preparation, for elections. And what you tend to see, and this speaks to also how our political parties are formed, which is a bit different from how the CDU and the others are formed, is that they are personalized, or they are formed around certain personalities. And you tend to hear this quote in Kenya that people say political parties are owned by certain people, which I believe to a large extent is true.
Are you saying that political parties are not owned by individuals in Germany?
If you look at ours, it's outright. I mean, like if you see how they were formed and how CDU was formed, if you...
How far back in history do you want to go into the formation of CDU, for instance?
Yes, that's the thing. I mean, like if CDU is quite an old party, right?
It's very old.
It's quite an old party. But this is the thing. I come back to, if you look at how CDU, I can give you a very good example of Ford Kenya, right? If you look at how Ford Kenya was formed, and at one point you'd realize that if a chairperson in Ford Kenya resigned, it was easy for them to select. Forget about the regional scope and all this stuff. I'm just looking at the structure. It could be easy for someone else to ascend to power based on procedures. But if you look at Kanu also had more or less the same kind of thing at one point in time. But most of the new parties that are coming in, it is based on you say that party and clearly
it's a briefcase.
Yes, you just see. I don't have to say it loud. You just see the person. You just see the person.
You see the individual.
You see the individual just besides the party. And so if this individual decides to go and join another party, that party goes dead. So you don't see those kinds of things in other established democracies. I mean, like, so if you decide that you want to leave CDU, there are structures that allow for someone else to ascend to power and continue the business of the party. It's a struggle that we face. But coming to answer your question, nomination is one of the biggest challenge and hurdles that I could foresee a lot of political parties going through, because as we speak, there are political parties that have decided right now to go ahead and point out people that they are going to give direct, certificates to. Of course, the law provides for two ways through which you can do nominations. So one is, of course, the direct nomination and the indirect nomination. So they would use one of the the lacunas in the laws to do what they want to do. And so if they think that they can give you a direct nomination because it serves the interest of a few and they think that is okay, again, it comes back to the structures and how they're established. They do that. And if you looked at the history of court cases, you don't want to go that side, because yes, of course, they get to be resolved, but the ones that remain behind are quite voluminous still.
Mr. Otichilo, if you look at political parties in the West and their processes of democracy, political parties, many political parties in the West, the issue of democracy that we seem to have, like when we talk about our party primaries where people go into this process of competition, even before the competition begins in the West, people have already been nominated, meaning you don't just wake up and decide you are going to contest, because that's what our people here do. I want to contest, I'm a member of this party, I want to put my name forward. People are more or less selected. Democracy may exist, but it's very guided. Meaning the party can more or less decide it is you they want, you. So you go through what they call their processes, and to determine it, case in point, if you look at, say, for instance, the UK, if you look at even America, they are what these democracies call safe seats. Meaning we know that in this region we have very serious support. So if we take a candidate and place them in this, the likelihood, simply not because of them, but because of the party support, they are very likely to win. Okay. Now, our political parties have an option. If you read their constitutions, they can either go the way of letting people elect you, or they can nominate you. It's not that they don't have the option, they do.
Yes.
But they choose this option of going the voting way because it gives a nice, nice optics of democracy. Whereas, in essence, when you look at the outcome, there are those who would say the outcomes were already predetermined. So everything else that took place before was a sham.
I would agree with you and disagree with you on two things. So one is, of course, maturity in their politics has taken time, and they've been in places where we are right now. If right now you would agree with me that we are fighting, we are trying to understand how to become members of a certain political parties, and if right now you are to even try and find out if you belong to a certain political party that you thought so, you'd be surprised once you enter the digits and what PP gives you, the membership. Everyone gets surprised, even in the meetings. Even some of the people that we've been having meetings with in KANU, ANC, and all these kinds of parties, they would try and look and verify whether they are parties, whether they are members of their own parties, and they would be surprised. No, I am not a member of Jubilee. How did I become this, and so forth? So you can imagine we're struggling with that now. And so the other thing is that we understand the maturity also in their politics. And of course, for you to be selected, and even it happens, that is one of the concepts of democracy and also party engagements, is for you to be selected, you cannot also be selected from nowhere. There's a contribution that you make to the party.
Over a period of time.
Yes. And they start to see your ability to deliver.
Yes.
And when the only difference
deliver, and also your loyalty to the party.
Not your loyalty to certain individuals, but your loyalty to the party. You see, those are two different things. In Kenya, one is that we are much subjective, not objective. So when you select, when you say you want to use a certain criteria to nominate a few people, and give them direct certificates because you feel that they're the best in Kenya, it is not because these people, are good on ground and they have certain positions that, are quite synonymous with them. No, in Kenya times it could be because there are few people who feel, yes, of course, we just need these people to, to be the gatekeepers and so forth. And like what I said, there are regions that you can be given a direct nomination, not because you're popular, just because your party is popular. And that is maybe the differences between when you look at the likes of CDU. For CDU to be given a direct nomination, I can attest you're going to sweat for it. For CDU to be able to identify you that you're extremely important, you're truly extremely important, and everybody would agree with that fact. And that is why
you're deep
It's
state.
undisputed.
and that is why
Yeah.
and most times you don't see a lot of chaos after that. In
Yeah.
Kenya, you see a lot of chaos, and I tell you, it's a fact. If you see a contingent, or if you see serious departure of politicians from party A to party B, which happens so many times in Kenya, almost towards nomination. Right now, every day, people are moving from one party. The other time, the senator for Kisii, I saw he went to DAP, I think yesterday, and he was in ODM. You tend to see why. It's because one of the things, if you ask them, they will tell you, it's because we feel this thing is going to be unfair.
The nomination will go to somebody
Yeah,
else.
so
It will not unfair. It will not favor you.
yes, but for them they would say that,
Yes.
right? But if you go to other countries that have these very matured democracies and internal party democracies, you tend to see as much as someone is given the certificate, you don't see the walkouts. Rarely do you see the walkouts, and it tells you something about these parties.
People, they respect the process. Let's take a break. 24 to 7 to 8. This is Kenya's biggest conversation. Edwin Adoga Otichilo is a country program manager at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. We're talking about politics and elections, borrowing lessons from Germany. Konrad Adenauer is a foundation formed by the CDU party of Germany. It receives public funding from Germany, is spearheading democracy in various parts of the world, including Germany itself. Time for us to look at the traffic and the weather. We'll be back shortly. We're talking about politics and elections in the country. So, Edwin, your foundation, you said, has been in the country since the 70s.
Yes.
The others, of course, also affiliated to German political parties, have also been in operation in this country for many years, more than 30, 40, 50 years in some cases. Others from other countries, we've had the Norwegians here, we've got the Swedes, we've got the British, the Americans, have been in this country for many years. Now, if we look at a journey of democratization, we can even look at the push for the return to multi-party democracy in the late 80s, early 90s. I'm sure your organization and the others were very active at that point, working with the various actors in the country to push that conversation. Since then, what have you been doing? Can you point us to, let's say, a political formation and say, you know what, we have worked with several people in the political party space. We have supported them. They formed a party. They have entrenched democracy from us sharing ideas with them. And this is where they are. Can you point us to one?
Yes. So I would start with, of course, we work with various political parties, and two very important, not partners, but cooperation parties that we've been keen on. And why this is important, it's because politics in Germany is based on ideology. And when we try to identify the parties, we try to identify parties not by asking them, but by doing a research to understand in the political spectrum where they are likely to to sit. And we were able to identify KANU because of the political spectrum that puts KANU to be more of a centrist party. Of course, CDU is also a center-right party, and so we started working with KANU for quite some time, at least since 2016 to date. Of course, before that, we worked with the likes of NAC, and we made a very tremendous contributions towards stabilizing NAC, and after that, NAC Kenya and also Ford Kenya. But for KANU, it was very interesting for us because the other day you would agree with me that they were able to come up with their own KANU manifesto for 2022 to 2027. And they may not have the energy right now when you ask Kenyans, the importance of a manifesto, but some of us who've been in this field, we know that you stop politicians shooting in the dark. And what you're trying to tell politicians is what we want to whip you in such a way that when you are elected, it doesn't matter if your party leader is a president, you are able to stick, at least guided by that manifesto for the next 5 years. So if you're talking about roads, if you're talking about infrastructure, for instance, schools, the education sector, if you're talking about climate change, there is a document that helps to standardize your politics or give more information to what you're talking about. And you understand that politicians chant out everything. I mean, like if it comes to how they are really good in terms of noting out the problems, but how to fix the problem is now the thing that we are trying to kind of understand from a lot of politicians. And so for us, one of the biggest interesting outcomes from both ANC and KANU is that they have a manifesto. ANC, of course, had a manifesto in 2017. We worked with them just to improve their manifesto right now. And the whole essence is the party needs to have something that they can rely on to make political decisions.
Does it frustrate the process, looking at political parties, coming from one end of the spectrum where political parties based on ideology as they were originally envisioned to be based, and then working with political parties that are not based on ideology, but are carried by characters, individuals? Does it frustrate the process? And then how do you work around that? Because essentially what you're trying to do is to fit or to get them to go in a certain direction. And the very foundation is not on those ideologies. They're carried by the leader.
Yes.
How do you work around that?
It's one of the toughest jobs, I think, so far. Because the thing is that when you look at their constitutions, when you look not only, I think all the parties, because we've done quite an interesting analysis here and there, we realize that all parties have very interesting constitutions that speaks to certain ideologies. But when you talk to them, their body language sends you to a different ideology.
Or even not just body language, the things they say, the very things they say.
Yes.
You know?
And they struggle and they feel this is still foreign. And so we try to, remind them that this is okay for them to have an ideology or for them to have an idea. And it is one of the best ways of maturing a party, because then people would come to a party because they believe in certain ideology or in certain ideas that are. And the essence of an idea or ideology is that it speaks to the heart. It is something that you'd stick with because it represents you. And so when you fixed with ODM's ideology, you realize that irrespective of Raila Odinga being the party leader or not, you're going to be there because that ideology is what you'd want to walk through with. That is the biggest challenge right now. A few still find it foreign, but of course it again comes back to how our political culture, how we've been using political parties to what benefit. A few friends of mine have been saying that political parties are becoming enterprises.
Becoming.
They're becoming enterprises.
Becoming. Your friends have come rather late into the game. They have been enterprises for the longest time.
Yes, so but of course they now speak to maybe their research and studies, and they can be able to give you more more resolute.
They can show you with history,
so they can follow. And
Eric, one of the very basic and most fundamental tools for data collection is observation. And yes, it is important to collect, collate, analyze, and present the findings of data. But even just from a casual observation, and this is the question I'm going to ask, with all the understanding, the research that has been done, is it possible for democracy to thrive on this continent amidst poverty?
Yes, that's the whole reason as to why you try to get power is the most important thing is to address poverty. That is always the first thing. And if you look at the debates and what politicians would say, 90% would be around poverty and how to address poverty. And it is not something that just started now. It started since independence. And if you look at, the strategies is corruption, disease, and so forth. Poverty, disease, and so forth. This is something that has been there. But democracy, for me, presents the best unique understanding on how to sort some of the problems. Because first and foremost, it allows institutions that are supposed to be mandated to represent the people and protect the people and protect public interest do their job. The idea that people have is every time you talk about democracy, they always just believe it's always about politicians and political parties. It is just one part, it's just one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is that you need, and this has to come from not just politicians but also from the civil society and also from the external push, that they have to be very strong institutions that can be able to hold even the most powerful people in the country to account. And this is also a very slow, but in most times you tend to see in countries like Malawi and so forth, steps are made, small steps are made. And even in the country right now, you tend to see that there are certain freedoms that we are enjoying right now that we couldn't be able to enjoy. And as we speak out, heads start rolling. People right now, if you look at how much we are trying to get in terms of properties and assets that have been, confiscated and given to the state, this is huge. This couldn't have happened if you had a very weak institution, because any person could bypass
there's
the
entrenchment of transparency and openness. But if you look at even what you talked about, your party CDU is center right,
center right,
center right, and then
Yes.
there are others that are left, others are right. Organizations from the West have been becoming the brand of Western democracy into the country. Is it universal? Can we say that democracy as is seen in the West is the same way it should be seen here? Is center in the West center here? Is right in the West right here, and left in the West left here? Is it possible for us to actually have a different approach to our democracy?
Yeah, we can have a different approach
And
that
ideologies.
works, approach and ideologies that work for us. But you tend to see that the same concept, because democracy, the concept still remains the same. You only contextualize the concept in such a way that it works for you. But if you ask me about ideology, for instance, and you are to look for what, from a scholar point of view, so if you are to look for what makes a certain ideology, for instance, so if you are conservative, so if you promote conservatism, there are certain things that are dear to you, and that is what I was saying, it speaks to you. There are people who, if you talk about family, it comes very key to them. They would say family comes first. There are people who would say discipline is very important, and so they would invest so much in structures and processes that make sure that there is a bit of public order and discipline, and that is just them. In the morning you'd realize that when you wake up, there's someone who has just to brush the shoes to be as clean as possible.
But the issue that we deal with here is that democracy seems to be aligned to capitalism.
Yeah.
And so you can't be democratic if you're not capitalistic. And yet, if you look at the tenets of socialism in my mind is more democratic.
Because everybody shares.
Yes.
Yes.
No, that's not entirely true. So if you look at the spectrum, I wish there's a center and then there's a left. You remember you say that, and there's the right. If you go towards the right, that is where capitalism comes.
You're being
in place.
capitalist.
But if you go towards the left, that is also where what you're saying, social democracy, not socialism, but social democracy, you tend to see, because the idea of social democracy is that it helps to bring up certain levels that are down to a point where they can compete
with those who are already up.
Yes. So it provide balance. So if you cannot afford, there's a way that the state can be able to come in and hold it for you, so that then you can be able to get to certain places. Even in Germany, you realize that as much as their center, CDU center, right, there are certain, social welfare, engagements that they do, just to make sure that if you're poor, you do not become poorer. There's a way that the state can fix that for you, but allows you to compete competitively, because one of the best ways to, grow the economy, and studies have shown that, is capitalism. If you allow people, the freedom, if you allow the market the freedom to choose and to pick and to be able to thrive, then you can generate more income. And the only way that countries are able to make money is when they trade among themselves. And when you trade among yourselves, you're looking at the comparative.
But when that policy is unchecked, what then do you have?
And that is why I'm saying democracy, our politicians come in, because if you have, and the institutions come in, if you have an institution that helps to regulate, that helps to say, hey, this is a red flag, you cannot pass here, this is unfair. You're making too much money, but you're not paying your taxes. You need to pay your taxes according to how much you're making. And so in Germany, it works because they say if you getting more money, you pay more taxes, and you pay more taxes to help the ones who cannot be able to afford to come to that point where they can be able to also compete. So that system works, and they find it very difficult for you to circumvent, the system in such a way that you want to make quite a lot of money. And you remember the issue of Dubai. A lot of people would leave the Western countries and get to Dubai because it's easy now to maneuver. But in Western countries, it's strict. So we need to see how you make it.
But teacher, there's something that has always bothered me, and I want to ask it even before our time comes to an end. When foundations such as the one you work for work with our politicians and our institutions, how well do they get to understand the people they're working among? And how well do they understand our institutions? I ask this question because every time we have an election, we have observers. What they observe and what they think they see and what we know is actually happening tends to be at loggerheads.
True.
So I'm asking the question because they seem to have been here, you seem to have worked. But again, I'm asking the question, how well do these foundations understand the people they work amongst? And perhaps even the more important question, how influential are they?
Yes, I don't think... So two things. Either they are what you call the bilateral partners, very serious partners. The EU is a very serious partner, and EU has a very serious influence. But also, the way nation states interact with each other. There are rules and there are laws that prohibits you from internally, meddling with issues, and they are very careful to do that. And at times they are forced to sit on the fence and only observe and make their own recommendations, and it's up to the state to pick the recommendations. Of course, they can sanction, they can start the other processes when they think that things are not really working out, but that comes when it's really necessary. For us, of course, we understand who we work with. When you look at the people that ought to provide certain changes and to reflect these changes to society, they are equally very powerful people. And so you are always trying to sit with them down and trying to convince them. And you understand that the state has the ultimate, political and security powers. So the only best thing is
There's only so far you can go.
Is just to do the soft politics and make your recommendations
Politics, really. You'll come back, Edwin, and we continue this conversation, because I think at some point we need to get into a point where we ask ourselves, do foundations such as yours, the other bilateral partners such as the European Union, do they have influence over the sovereignty of certain countries and how then they practice their democracy, how elections are held, outcomes of these elections? I mean, when we see Raila and Ruto going to speak in the UK, and they could be telling us those things here, or even speaking to the world from here, what does it say? Is it a balance of power? come again.
Thanks. I will come. I think there's so much that we need to put into context.
Yes.
Only that time couldn't allow, but I'm happy to have been here, and thanks for the time. Looking forward.
Thank you. Edwin Adoga is a country program manager at Konrad Adenauer Foundation. Good morning.